under the ratepayer 9% cushion on market rates for the next 35 years. Approval of this project, if found consistent under the terms of reference of the UARB, will tie up any further opportunities for other private sector imports to assist to bring down rates in a Nova Scotia open market for many years. We all know that where monopolies and when monopolies exist, the only way to get the better price, to get the better deal, is indeed to provide competition. So in effect, this project strengthens Nova Scotia Power's monopoly in this province. The UARB also approved the RES and the RFQ approval system for new IPPs to be administered by Nova Scotia Power. This is not any semblance of the original open market design envisioned by Nova Scotia by any of the original acts or regulations. So in many ways, Nova Scotia Power wants to have no direct competitors in Nova Scotia wholesale electricity market for the next 35 years, and we know that the NDP, in fact, is enabling Nova Scotia Power and Emera to do just that. So when I talk about Muskrat Falls to constituents, and they want to know, what my view is. And I said, I go back, and I was a high school student in Newfoundland, and I heard Joey Smallwood speak about what was going to transform Newfoundland, and that was, of course, the Upper Churchill Falls development, the creation of Lobstick Lake, which would in fact produce about 5 million kilowatts of electricity, and this would be part of Newfoundland's future economy. But what we must realize is that during a time of literally no inflation, Newfoundland made a long-term 69-year deal at the same rate. We may say, Quebec should have reopened the deal. Well, Quebec and Newfoundland are working out the deal that was made by Smallwood during a time when inflation was pretty well non-existent. And so going by today's figures and numbers and analysis, no, it isn't a great deal, but it's the deal that Joey Smallwood saw as part of transforming the economy of Newfoundland at that time. Now, it's interesting that Manitoba Hydro International, as they've started to provide some updating on cost analysis, in fact, have now moved the price tag from $5 billion to $7.7 billion for the entire project. And this is a 24% increase in capital cost in just 2 years. And Manitoba Hydro International went on to say, and this is the part that I feel we need to take a look at, they said it was the best deal for Newfoundland, and they would not go so far as to say it was even a good deal for Nova Scotia. And they projected that benefit to Newfoundland from now until the year 2067. Well, we're not even going to get to the year 2067, because after the 35 years, when we get electricity, building the Maritime Link, we're going to be so generous that we're going to give the Maritime Link back to Newfoundland. Because you can be assured that when 2041 does come, Newfoundland and Hydro-Quebec will work out shorter term, more sensible inflationary factors calculated in the next deal, and they will continue to move power through Quebec. And I feel that Newfoundland is going to need the power that will come through the Maritime Link, or a good portion of it, and we are prepared to pay for this. We may not, if electricity does move through the Maritime Link, Nova Scotia may not be one of the contract holders. It may all go into New England. So there is much to think about and ponder about on this deal. And I believe the interveners should get the required time, not even a set number of days of 180, but simply have an open-ended opportunity for all the interveners to have a true say on whether this is a good deal for our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Glad to join in this debate around the importance of Muskrat Falls to our energy security and our future of this province. You know, Mr. Speaker, I hear many things from the member from Kings West, but I wonder, I know he quoted Manitoba Hydro, but I think he made some assertions there, Mr. Speaker, and I wonder if he actually called Manitoba Hydro up on the telephone like his party did with Hydro-Quebec on a whim, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to be able to stand here and talk about this, the importance of this project, the importance of securing a future for our young people, securing a future for energy security, and stable rates, Mr. Speaker, something that we haven't had in this province for many, many years, Mr. Speaker. And I had the chance to stand in my place last week in address and reply to talk about how in the past, in 1977, the Liberal Premier of the day talked about they switched from having 100% oil generation in Nova Scotia, and then moved all the coal, Mr. Speaker, so to speak. They put all their eggs in one basket. And the Liberal Premier of the day said, well, you know, at least it wasn't as much as the utility had asked for. Mr. Speaker, you know how much power went up in 1 year alone? 44%. What year? 1977. 1977. Do you know what, Mr. Speaker? You know what, Mr. Speaker? Do you know what, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the history books talk about it, Mr. Speaker. They talked about it, Mr. Speaker. The history books say what happened, Mr. Speaker, and we know that's the truth. We know that that's the truth, Mr. Speaker. And so we talk about a plan. Our government has been able to, I mean, we've had a lot of issues, Mr. Speaker. A lot of issues that are to importance of many Nova Scotians. And one in particular, Mr. Speaker, as I go out to the constituents that I have the pleasure of representing, people talk about power rates. Absolutely, they talk about power rates, Mr. Speaker. And in the past, we've had governments who haven't looked at the issue. They've just said, well, you know, that's life. That's life, Mr. Speaker. And you know, one of the things that our government won't do is sit by the sidelines. We can't sit by the sidelines anymore, Mr. Speaker, because we are turning the corner, Mr. Speaker. We're turning the corner where we have the ability to create energy, that is stable, it's reliable, it's tax-free, Mr. Speaker. It's green. It's a made-in-Atlantic Canadian solution, Mr. Speaker. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party said, well, let's just hand over everything to Hydro-Quebec. Let's do it. And so, or sometimes they may suggest, well, let's just do natural gas, like they did in 1977, moving from one fossil fuel to another. And so, Mr. Speaker, it begs the question of our energy security in Nova Scotia. The Liberal Party talks about this supposed plan that they have for energy, which in the past, in fact, last week I talked about how it was basically basically less than a tweet you could do on Twitter, Mr. Speaker. There was no substance to it, Mr. Speaker. There's no substance to the Liberal plan for energy. Okay, and so, when we talk about that, when we talk about the Liberal plan, they never mention, Mr. Speaker, they never mention about the federal the new federal regulations brought down by the federal government around greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Speaker, they never talk about that. And if they had their way, they would just let that go by the wayside and allow Nova Scotia to pay penalties and fines. Continue to build coal-fired plants, allowing them to continue to operate in this province. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians don't want that anymore. That was back in the day, Mr. Speaker. Why do you think the BC Hydro, Manitoba Hydro, and Hydro-Quebec all have low rates? Hydro-Quebec. They don't have low rates. Why, Mr. Speaker? Why, Mr. Speaker? It's because I look forward to hearing the member from Yarmouth stand up in this emergency debate. Mr. Speaker.
You understand me? You have to hear from me, not him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So this is. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, this is getting back to what I was saying before. This is about having an energy security for this province that we've never had before, Mr. Speaker. Getting out of the days of double-digit increases. Double-digit increases where governments, Liberal and Conservatives, would just sit back and let it happen. 30%. And they voted against removing tax off electricity, off home heating. That last year, Mr. Speaker, put $104 million back into the pockets of everyday Nova Scotians. $104 million. Another very interesting part, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about is the issue of the obviously, they want to talk about how much it's going to cost. They want to talk about how much it's going to cost. Less than a percentage for the first 5 years of the project, Mr. Speaker. And then over time, the cost will go down. That's what we know. It's exactly what we know, Mr. Speaker. $1.50 to every bill. And what this is doing is allowing us to, this is what it's doing, Mr. Speaker, is allowing Nova Scotia to have an energy portfolio, not all in one basket, not all in coal, Mr. Speaker. Because what we know is that when we do that, we are tied to that one source of energy. So for instance, in the last 7 years, we know because it's history. We know that because we've been tied to one source of international fuel, coal, because we've been tied to that, our energy, the price of energy has gone up by, the price of coal has gone up by 75% in the international market, Mr. Speaker. Now, if we had known that back then, Mr. Speaker, back when we moved from one fossil fuel to another, if we had known that today that we know, because that's what history tells us, we probably, hopefully, the government of the day wouldn't have done that, but they did. They did. They went from one fossil fuel to the other. And so that's the other reality, Mr. Speaker, is at what cost? At what cost do we move from one fossil fuel or one source of energy to another? And back then, it was all greenhouse gas emissions, Mr. Speaker. And for us to sit on the sidelines, the question has to be asked, what's the cost of doing nothing? Absolutely. What is the cost of doing nothing? And so this is why we need to build an energy mix in our province, Mr. Speaker. And the Muskrat Falls is just one part of that, Mr. Speaker. And so the Liberal Party talks about, this has been analyzed. I heard the member from Halifax Clayton Park getting up saying this hasn't been analyzed. So the government asked a very knowledgeable person by the name of John Dalton to issue a report to talk about and compare different options, talking about Lower Churchill and comparing the cost to Hydro-Quebec and then comparing the cost to domestic energy sources such as natural gas and wind. And so what we know, Mr. Speaker, is that if we were to switch if we were to switch 100% of the energy that we need to Hydro-Quebec, it would cost us $402 million more. That's what John Dalton said. So why would we as a government, why would we want to have something more that costs more than what the project of Muskrat Falls is? Why? So that's $402 million more than what is estimated for the overall cost of the project. And then what we also know is that if we went completely to natural gas and wind, that would be $105 billion more. So that's what we know, Mr. Speaker. That's what we know, Mr. Speaker. The Lower Churchill and the Muskrat Falls, the Maritime Link, will improve our diversity and security of energy. It will improve our regional grid reliability. It will improve regional supply flexibility, promoting price competition, and it will achieve environmental and clean energy targets. This is exactly what John Dalton, someone who relies on his own credibility in what he does for a living, to move forward to bring forward a report that, well, you know, the experts in the opposition just say, oh, well, it can't be true. The other thing, talking about energy, I mean, this is an important piece of the puzzle, Mr. Speaker, but I want to talk about something that came to us all as MLAs the other day from Mr. Crandallmeyer, the CEO of Efficiency Nova Scotia. And he talked about what last year in 2012 Efficiency Nova Scotia was able to achieve with the people of Nova Scotia, be able to achieve in energy conservation, Mr. Speaker. Because in the past, we have never had an ability to encourage people, to give them the ability to conserve energy in their own home and their own businesses. So one thing that we do know now within our energy portfolio, that about 4.1% of our overall energy was around conservation. Was conservation, Mr. Speaker. 4.1% may not seem a lot to the opposition, but it does mean a lot, Mr. Speaker. It does mean a lot. And in fact, we have been able to, through Efficiency Nova Scotia that our government created, now I know the Liberals want to get rid of it. If they had their way, they'd get rid of it. They'd get rid of it. And so, Mr. Speaker, what we do know is that we have been able to help homeowners in their own homes to conserve energy, not only saving them $104 million from taking the tax off home heating. We have been able to save them in 2012 alone over $100 million in conservation. So if you add those two up, Mr. Speaker, we have over $200 million in conservation, in savings for Nova Scotians. So we've been able to retire. This is from Efficiency Nova Scotia, that every single MLA in this chamber received an email last week from Efficiency Nova Scotia outlining some of the work that they've done. And I know that the member from Preston, when Efficiency Nova Scotia was here during public accounts, that he talked about, in fact, I think, Mr. Speaker, he even used the words, "Thank you very much for making life more affordable for people in Nova Scotia." I tabled that in past sessions, Mr. Speaker. So in Nova Scotia, homeowners have been able to, with the help of Efficiency Nova Scotia, retired 7,976 inefficient old refrigerators, freezers, and air conditioners, Mr. Speaker. Rebates offered in efficient products, it resulted in 274,610 products purchased. Completed energy efficiency upgrades to 28,397 homes, resulted in an average annual savings of $182 per household, Mr. Speaker. An estimated $12,000 of the 28,397 households received the residential direct install services for low-income families, Mr. Speaker. Why would the Liberal Party want to get rid of that, Mr. Speaker? In 2012 alone, Nova Scotians saved enough electricity through efficiency programming to power about 16,000 homes. That's in 1 year alone, Mr. Speaker. We have been able to bring forward an energy plan, Mr. Speaker, that will ensure the lowest, fairest rates for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. The opposition can get up and go on about whatever they want, but this is the truth, Mr. Speaker. This is what Nova Scotians wanted in the government, and if the Liberals had their way, my question to the Liberal Party is, if they had their way, would they cancel the deals? All these deals. Are they going to cancel Efficiency Nova Scotia? Would they take the HST off home electricity? And if they had their way, would they cancel the Maritime Link? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been interesting to hear both the Liberals and the NDP debating this important topic, since they've both locked in on either hitching their wagons to one solution or the other without doing their own homework about what actually worked best to freeze power rates or actually deliver lower power rates to Nova Scotians. But I do want to give the Liberals credit for calling the debate today. Even though they're a little late to the party, I'm glad they're finally here. I will table for the benefit of the House the press release from December 4th, 2012, where the PCs actually caused an emergency debate on the cost of Muskrat Falls to happen in the first place. Leave it to the Liberals when they smell political opportunity finally, months later, to do the same thing. But of course, we've been asking the government to show us the costs of Muskrat Falls, tell us how much that power will cost when it comes to our homes and businesses for months and months and months now. But at least they're here. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that we supported this late but better late than never call for an emergency debate today is that the Premier himself, on behalf of the government, has long ago made up his mind about how much Nova Scotians are going to pay and where they're going to get their power from for the next 35 years. That's why he, as government, passed the Maritime Link Act and regulations which force the UARB to do what they want them to do. And if anyone had any doubt that that's what's really going on here, all they need to do is look at the Cape Breton Post from just a few days ago, and I will table this quote from Premier Dexter, where he says, and I quote directly, "People, I think, may think that it has to do with the UARB hearing, but that project is going ahead, and the only question is how that's going to happen." Now, what kind of responsible political leader would make their mind up first and then tie the hands of the URB, the one body that we're supposed to rely on to determine what is the lowest and best cost for Nova Scotians?
Order, please. Just a quick little note here. It is important to refer to any member by their, is not proper to refer to any member by their name in any way during proceedings in the House. This includes notices of motion and while reading from documents such as newspaper stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that clarification. Those are the words of the Premier who long ago made up his mind, who before the Maritime Link hearings even start, has sanctioned the project, allowing Emera to go ahead with their work, incurring costs, accepting that a penalty will be payable by the taxpayers of Nova Scotia if there are any changes to the regulations in the future. Mr. Speaker, it is not right to handcuff the people of Nova Scotia like that over so much money, over such a long period of time. You know, Mr. Speaker, in the everyday lives of most Nova Scotians, when it comes time to make a major purchase, a home or a car, well, they do their homework. They do their homework. They look at all the options available. They look at all the costs. Now, this Premier wants Nova Scotians to buy a shiny new car regardless of the cost. And instead of doing his own homework, instead of comparing all the options and finding the lowest price green power for the future for our province, he's picked one and signed on the dotted line and committed to it. And then to try and show that it's the lowest cost, instead of doing a fair comparison to all the other options, what he does is he allows for hundreds of consultants, millions of dollars to be spent in consultants to try and show that that one choice works for Nova Scotians. Well, we could save a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, on all those consultants and all those hearings if we just had a Premier and a government that made these decisions in a business-like way by asking everyone who can supply us with power, including Muskrat Falls, to come forward with their best bid for clean, green, renewable energy, and then we would know whether this is the right choice or not. But that's not what they are doing, Mr. Speaker. And how ironic that in the last election, the Premier and NDP ran on a promise to stop the increases in power rates. And before anyone says, no, we didn't, in that virtual world that they now live in, we have the brochures and the advertising that was done by the government that made exactly that claim. And yet their record now, 4 years in, is clear. 30% increase in power rates. That after they get into office, the NDP decided on their own that they want Nova Scotia to not just go renewable, which of course is a goal everybody would applaud, but that we had to be the most renewable on the planet as fast as possible, regardless of the cost, regardless of the price, regardless of the jobs that are thrown aside along the way. And that is wrong, Mr. Speaker. Neither the Liberals or the NDP want to talk about it, but the truth is the truth. The reason our power rate's going up, the power company has admitted it, the Minister of Energy has admitted it on occasion, is that the government is wanting the power company to buy renewable energy far faster than Nova Scotians can afford. That is the problem. 30% increase. And without any mandate to do it. Because one can just imagine if the NDP had asked Nova Scotians in the last election, are you willing to pay 30% more so that we alone can claim to be more renewable than anyone else, the fastest? What Nova Scotians would have voted if they had been given that question. That, Mr. Speaker, is the problem. That no one gave them a mandate to do that. No one said it's okay to lose 5,000 jobs because we have to have the highest power rates in the country. No one said it's okay that my household budget or my neighbor's budget has to be squeezed, or that seniors have to close off rooms in their apartments that they can't afford to heat because we have a government that wants to boast that they're the most renewable on the planet. No one was asked that question. And that's why we are where we are today, Mr. Speaker, and that is wrong. And if anyone thinks that the Liberals are any better on this question, they are sorely mistaken, because it's time the truth came from the Liberal Party as well, Mr. Speaker. It's time the truth came from there as well, that as much as they like to complain and carp and tear down and rip up, do you know what their answer is on energy? They had to photocopy a failed policy from New Brunswick and spend a lot of money on TV ads trying to convince Nova Scotia they would do any better here. Somehow they have stumbled upon a policy that not only drives up our rates higher, has been shown time and time again in New Brunswick, in Ontario, in Alberta, in California, in Texas, in other places, but it actually kills investment in renewables at the same time. Renewables to retail does not work because it makes power rates more expensive for everybody, and it eliminates any investment in renewables at the same time. Now that takes a special kind of genius to find a way to both raise our rates and reduce the opportunity for renewable investment at the same time, but that is what the Liberal Party has come to, Mr. Speaker, even though right next door, their own review, which anyone who takes 5 minutes to do their homework can find out, has been found to be, and I quote, an absolute failure of a policy. And now, after criticizing the NDP for wanting to hitch our wagon for a long, long time to one source, to Muskrat Falls, they're actually making secret phone calls into Hydro-Quebec, trying to hitch our wagon there. Mr. Speaker, they are exactly as guilty as the NDP are of going about trying to find political solutions to what is a very human and real economic problem in our province, Mr. Speaker. Now, even though, Mr. Speaker, they spent a lot of money from who knows where on TV ads, when their leader was asked, will your policy actually reduce power rates? Do you know what he said, Mr. Speaker, on the CBC? What he said was, well, actually, no, we just want stable power rates. Now, how ironic is that that is exactly the same sorry excuse that we hear from the NDP. And this definition of stable for Liberals is the same as it is for the NDP. It means up and up and up. Stable means up. That is the exposed truth, and it's time Nova Scotians knew the truth about the crazy policies that both the Liberals and the NDP are promoting on power. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we're ever going to kickstart the economy of Nova Scotia, save those jobs, if we're ever going to create new jobs in all parts of our province, we need to put in place the fundamentals of a modern, dynamic economy. That means lower taxes that are fair and competitive. That means power rates that are fair and competitive. That means investments in our schools that allow every child to get ahead in the 21st century. And when it comes to power, Mr. Speaker, we can't afford more 30% increases like the NDP have. We can't afford failed schemes like the Liberals use for their own political purposes that actually don't do a thing that's positive for our economy or for Nova Scotians. What we can do is freeze the increases in power rates in their tracks right now. Stop the madness by instructing the power company that they should buy as much renewable energy every year as they can within the current rates. We can get to the same result, that green, renewable day we all want. We get to the same result within the current rates. Because, Mr. Speaker, anyone that understands how the economy works, anyone who has done their homework trying to get to the right answer, will know that every year the power company pays off a little bit more of those old plants. Every year they pay off more of those old plants, freeing up money within the current rates for investment in renewable. We will get to that same end result, but not another job need be lost in this province. Not another family have to make that awful choice when they can't make their power bill about what they're going to give up instead. We all get there together to that renewable, affordable day that is so important to a modern, dynamic economy, Mr. Speaker. And thirdly, we can actually lower power rates. This has been shown by independent studies. If instead of hitching our wagon to some expensive plan from Muskrat Falls or making secret phone calls to hitch our wagon into Quebec, if we actually made a business-like choice, and that is to review all of these projects, review all of these projects, Mr. Speaker, free up the UARB to make the best choice they can. Because the sorry truth is, why did the government pass the Maritime Link Act in the first place? When we have a UARB that, when left to its own devices, would be free to do exactly what needs to be done, which is look at all of the options, no matter where they may be. Because what Nova Scotians want to know is that somewhere, someone has done their homework to find the lowest price power for them. Not hitch our wagon to one place, not hitch our wagon to another place. Where can we get the cheapest possible power that is also renewable in the future? And you know what, Mr. Speaker? We have spent 20 years under all parties watching one of those options whiz by our province into New England, and that is natural gas, which may not meet the NDP renewable dream, but it is 2/3 cleaner when it comes to emissions, and it is a lot cheaper. And the URB is not even looking at natural gas on its own. They have to join it up with wind. But why not look at it on its own? Why not reclaim that gas to generate electricity here? I heard the member opposite talk about Manitoba using hydro. Well, they should check their own research, because in Manitoba today, do you know what they're investing in? Not more hydro, which they could, because it's too expensive, more natural gas because it is clean and cheap. So let's take our natural gas and burn more of it here and save Nova Scotia households a lot of money and build that economy that creates jobs for all the people of the province, no matter where they live, and is two-thirds greener. If the government hadn't passed the Maritime Link Act, the URB would be free to pursue that option, among all others. But the fact they felt the need to bring into this House a Maritime Link Act and regulations to restrict the URB is proof that neither the NDP nor the Liberals have a clue about how to actually get power prices under control. And that's why this is an emergency debate. Because of three parties, we have two who are in a state of their own emergency because they don't know what to do other than play politics with something as important as the price of electricity, and that's what's wrong here today.
Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise to speak on this emergency debate, and I certainly want to commend my colleague from Dartmouth East and leader of our party who've continually put the issue of electricity on the front burner here in Nova Scotia after listening to what Nova Scotians are going through in order to try to find solutions. I have to say the focus of my remarks was not going to be on the third party, but after what I just heard, I have to say I can't understand why they're in opposition. Because, you know, after what we just heard from the leader of the Conservative Party, they have all the answers. They're right, everyone else is wrong. How possibly is it that they're sitting in third place in this legislature? Maybe if the leader of the third party had somehow been involved with the previous Conservative government, maybe they wouldn't be in opposition. But wait a minute. Wasn't he the chief of staff, the top position, the top political position in the Conservative government? Then how can it be, if he had all the answers to energy and to electricity, why is it that under a Conservative government for 10 years, we saw increases every year? Where was all of his answers during those 10 years? Whether he was chief of staff or the credit union, he still had the ideas. Why was he hiding them? Why wasn't he making secret calls at night to the Premier? Either the one who he was chief of staff with or the Premier after that. Yet suddenly today, he's got all the answers and would lecture us. But with all due respect, Mr. Speaker, neither I nor any of our caucus or any Nova Scotians needs a lecture from the leader of the third party in this legislature. Mr. Speaker, it's quite clear that energy is one of the main focus that's on the minds of Nova Scotians, whether they be in Richmond County, whether they be anywhere in the province. Mr. Speaker, I had a lady that contacted my office about 3 weeks ago, and she said, my power bill from 1 month to the next, from one billing period to the next, because they're monthly billing periods, said increased by $400. But she said, I didn't do anything differently. How is that? And I said, well, there was a 3% increase that the government of the day allowed to take place again. But even she said, I'm not that good at math, but 3% doesn't add up to a $400 increase. And that was true. So I asked myself, is it possibly just a fluke? It might be a billing error or something. Maybe this is not something that's the norm. So I posted a message on my Facebook site, which is the new way of communicating with our constituents. And I gave her story and said, has anyone else experienced something similar? And Mr. Speaker, the answer that came back, which is on my Facebook site, for those who are friends on the site, I believe there's over 1,400 people, but people were sharing their stories of $100 increases, $200, $300, and one was of over $500 increase. And yet, people were saying, we've done everything possible to reduce our consumption. We've changed our appliances. We've changed our light bulbs. We're doing everything possible to consume less, yet our power rates keep going up. To their credit, Nova Scotia Power has agreed to look at all of their account information and do a review to see if there is some other explanation. But it's clear that this is happening in households throughout Nova Scotia. So we can sit here and we can blame each other, or we can try to find solutions. Is the maritime link a possible solution? Maybe. Is it the best possible deal for Nova Scotians? We don't know the answer to that. The Premier will tell us it is. The Minister of Energy tells us it is. Yet the one independent body that's asked to look at this from a non-political perspective, looking at the finances, looking at the projections, looking at the terms of the deal, is being restricted in the length of time that it can reach a decision. And that's the concern that we have. And I want to say that I'm proud of the fact that our leader went back a number of years ago to Newfoundland and started the discussion about how Nova Scotian might be able to benefit from that. And we've never said that we're against it. What we've said is it the best possible deal? Have we entered into a deal that's in the best interest of Nova Scotians? That is the essence of the argument. And I don't believe Nova Scotians are convinced of that. And I think they are looking for an independent body to be able to tell them whether they agree it is the best deal. If we were the only ones, Mr. Speaker, in this province, saying that we have questions about the maritime link, then one could easily say it's politics. But the Minister of Energy knows we're not alone. Interveners are asking the same thing. A group has formed of professionals that took time out of their busy lives to say we're very concerned about entering into this deal. And we have many questions. We should be listening to them. Because it's ironic in all this debate that we hear about what a terrible deal Newfoundland entered into with Quebec years ago. And yet here we are rushing to enter into another 35-year deal. If anything, history should tell us we should take our time. We should make sure it is the best possible deal. And I would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that if we weren't on the verge of an election, the government would not be in a rush. But that is what is pushing this. And for a 35-year deal, we should take our time. And I have to say it was interesting today, the contrast of messages we heard from the government. Because we heard the Deputy Premier when he was being asked about the issues with the Auditor General's funding and the error with the $27 million within the budget. His response was, we're looking forward, Mr. Speaker. The opposition can keep looking behind at what happened last year and a few weeks ago. We're looking forward. Then the Minister of Community Services gets up and she starts talking about the governments for the last 250 years in Nova Scotia and what they did. Well, I'm not sure if you'd call that looking forward, but if that's the case, I don't want to meet her on the highway because I think she spends a lot more time looking in her rearview mirror than she does looking out her windshield. But imagine, here we are in 2013 having a majority government talking about 250 years ago. That's what we had. But it gets better because as ridiculous as it was for the Minister of Community Services, we have the Premier of the province get up and talk about the single largest power increase this province has seen under a Liberal government. Naturally, I was quite surprised to hear that. So our question was, what year was it? Now the Premier, he's cagey. He didn't answer. He's politically smart. Now the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville, anyways, as I said, the Premier is very politically smart. But the member from Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville, with great joy, shouts out, 1977. Well, we know that the member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville wasn't born. So we can't blame him. We cannot blame him for that. I'll acknowledge that. And Mr. Speaker, I guess I have to apologize. I was 5 years old. And I'm a Liberal, so I guess I have to say I'm sorry for what happened in 1977. Now, how ridiculous can you get when a majority government sits there and refers to 1977, when we have Nova Scotians that are trying to decide, do I renew my prescriptions, do I go buy food, or do I keep Nova Scotia Power from cutting off my electricity at my house? And they want to talk about what happened in 1977. You know, Mr. Speaker, the mix of messages today was, again, was amazing because every other day you'll hear the government say what a horrible thing it was when the Tories privatized Nova Scotia Power. It was terrible. Yet today, Quebec Hydro, under the NDP, is the 4th largest monopoly in the world, electricity monopoly. But who owns Quebec Hydro? It's the people of Quebec. But somehow, this government has decided that Quebec Hydro is evil. Now, I have my own suspicions as what the undertones of those are, and they're not pretty. They're ugly. They're absolutely ugly. And I can say, to hear a Premier who was the chair of the Council of Federation openly attack another province, because whether they like it or not, Quebec Hydro is the people of Quebec. And I don't know what they've done to this government. Certainly federally, they supported them federally, but they've done something. To now hear the Minister of Energy say, we want a made in Atlantic Canada solution. Well, Quebec's next door. We're not on the other side of the world. You know what Nova Scotians want? They want the best possible solution. They don't care where it comes from. They want to see lower power rates that they can afford to heat their homes, and they can afford to have energy security for their families. I'm proud to be a part of a party that's prepared to look everywhere, prepared to explore every option, and prepared to do everything that it has to be taken to find lower electricity for Nova Scotians, a better future for Nova Scotians, and is not prepared to close any doors in seeking that solution. Merci.
Thank you. The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues on this side, Mr. Speaker, have presented a range of important points in relation to this resolution, and I don't want to repeat what they have already said, but I do wish for a few moments to focus on an element of the overall Muskrat Falls debate, which sometimes is, though it ought not to be, cast into the shade in the midst of various discussions about things like project costs and electricity prices. And that subject is the extraordinarily important contribution of the Muskrat Falls project to the most significant environmental challenge of our era, the mitigation of climate change and the effort to bring into curtailment our province's aggregate greenhouse gas emissions. I'm one of those people in Nova Scotia who holds the view that when this era is subject to the judgment of history, and when governments of the early 21st century are subject also to that judgment, one key criterion on which that assessment is going to be made will be what was done or what was not done on the era's pivotal question of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Now, we are in Nova Scotia, as in elsewhere, on the matter of climate change, we're in the position of three individuals who are described in the Old Testament. Three lepers, in fact, they were. Three lepers in the Old Testament who found themselves in a situation, it's a long story, but I'll cut to the chase, who found themselves in a situation where they were at the gate of a certain city, a place where they were not permitted to be, and where they were also unable, for a number of reasons, to retreat into the city that they had just come from, and who therefore found themselves in a position where they had no choice but to make a move. They had to make a move. As on greenhouse gases, we have to make a move. And so those individuals set out with some boldness into the future. Now, as we do this, stepping out on this question under our government's leadership, we do so on the basis of a program which has a variety of important facets. We do so on the basis of the overarching goal of 40% energy production from renewables by 2020. We do so on the basis of the range of government programs for bringing renewables onto the grid. We do so on the basis of salient industrial investments. Particularly, I would draw attention to the investment in LED lighting in Amherst and in the production of turbines in Trenton. We do so on the basis of the transformation from the sinecure-ridden conserve to efficiency Nova Scotia, with the six-fold increase in expenditures on energy savings that has accompanied this transition. We do so on the basis of the development and investment in tidal power, and we do so on the very important basis and foundation of Muskrat Falls and the Maritime Link. Now, unlike some others who have contributed to this debate, I am not an expert in the energy field. I have, however, spent much of my life in the area of project development, in the area of what sometimes people call social entrepreneurship. That is, in the development and bringing to fruition and realization of cooperative or other sorts of community initiatives and then projects. And in the work of bringing forward projects in communities over my life, one thing I have learned is that the development of projects that have a major scope, projects which are bold, as the lepers were in stepping forward, projects which have a kind of a breathtaking characteristic about them. In the development of those kinds of projects, there is a very familiar pattern. A project, let's say perhaps for a new cooperative, will go through the requisite period such projects have to have of research and detailed thought and consideration, and that period will go along until the moment comes when it ought to come, when a decision is made, as with the decision being made by the lepers in the Old Testament. It goes along until the decision is made that now is the moment to step boldly beyond the gate. Now is the moment to step boldly beyond the city. And now is the moment to step ahead and go to the place where we have to go. But when a project in a community is being developed, and it comes to the point where that project is actually being concretely put forward, often there's a familiar pattern of difficulties that can take place. For every great project has a certain point. It has a certain moment when the adequate information is on hand for going forward, but where every last little I cannot yet utterly be dotted, and every last T cannot yet utterly be crossed, because that's the point in the project when those questions simply cannot be answered with absolute exactitude and precision at that time. And very often, at this very predictable stage of the development of any kind of a major, bold, breathtaking project, there's something difficult that happens. Often at that stage of the project, those who have not adequately taken in the scope of the project, those who have not taken in the scope of the project's vision, those who are heavy-footed by their nature, those who are actually, in fact, committed to staying in the gate, or who are committed to returning to the city, they will invariably, they can be counted on repeatedly to ask for more study, for more research, for more information, for more time, for more, in fact, anything at all. It's like moving forward with the job of the moment, the establishing of the project. And often, very often, community organizers will tell you, very often they'll do so by focusing on the absence of that very type of detailed exactitude which precisely cannot be produced at such a moment in the development of any breathtaking major project. Mr. Speaker, I regard the continued questioning from the opposition about the precise effect, dollars and cents, of Muskrat Falls on the power bills to come into people's homes in future years. I regard this continued pattern of questioning, along with the repeated calls for delays in reviews and evaluations of the Maritime Link, I regard these as considerations of these very predictable order in the development of any major project. And I propose that Nova Scotia at this moment does not need this kind of hesitant heavy-footedness, not when it comes to climate change. Because in every project that is ultimately worthwhile and necessary, there does come a moment when those who cannot move beyond this niggliness of negation have to be left behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
It's my pleasure to rise and join this debate here this evening. The point of this debate, Mr. Speaker, is that we're looking to see that the Utility and Review Board should have a little bit more time to step back and look at the facts and the circumstances around the power rates and the Muskrat Falls and the Maritime Link project to see if it is a good project for the people of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, we just heard about the lepers, the gates, and not being able to step back, they have to go forward. Mr. Speaker, we're in a different situation here today. We're able to step back, take a deep breath, and try and determine if this project is the best for the province of Nova Scotia. We heard a speaker talk this afternoon earlier in the debate about putting all their eggs in one basket, how every other party is putting their eggs in one basket. Now, I know the Easter season has just passed, and he probably enjoyed his Easter with his Easter egg hunts. But, Mr. Speaker, we're debating a serious issue here, a real serious issue. And we're hearing about stable power rates. And they're saying at the lowest possible cost, but they can't tell us what the lowest possible cost is. I mean, we're all for stable power rates, but the cost, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians can't afford the rate we're going at today. Nova Scotia Power has said that it's going to cost us 2 to 3% a year in our power rates for the rest of the decade. And we hear this afternoon from the government that it's going to cost 0.5 percentage point. And, Mr. Speaker, they talk about the travel around the province, the tour, the power tour they're on. And I listened and sat in on one of these tours. And yeah, no, I agree that Muskrat Falls may be green, but I'm telling you, the way they're speaking, that everybody's jumping up and down and they're partying in the streets about Muskrat Falls and the cost of their power rates, that's not what I heard. They asked the same questions as we asked. What is the cost and what will the cost be on our power rates? We got no answer, but we also got time turned off. We were supposed to have a debate, a presentation for 2 hours. An hour and a half in, that was enough. We had to go talk to the media. That was game over. We had no chance to ask the rest of the questions. So is it a good deal? We don't know. If it is a good deal, we're all behind it. Now, Mr. Speaker, if the information is accurate and it is a good deal for the people of Nova Scotia, then that's great. But to lock us into a contract for 35 years with no way out, and if that's not a good deal, the rest of us, our children, our grandchildren, have to live with that deal. So why should we rush into an agreement that we don't know enough about and we don't have all the information at our fingertips? If this is the possibly best deal, what is the big rush? Mr. Speaker, we heard about Hydro-Quebec and Newfoundland, and we had a little history lesson on Joey Smallwood, the former Premier of Newfoundland, who got into a deal with Quebec. And from what we can understand, that deal with Quebec wasn't the greatest deal for Newfoundland. So do we, the people of Nova Scotia, and the opposition parties over here, believe that Newfoundland is going to get the same deal again? That we're going to be the beneficiary of this deal? And Newfoundland is not going to be the one that benefits the most? We hear of 1,000 jobs, we hear of 1,000 jobs here, we hear of a number of jobs there, but no one can tell us what the jobs are going to be and where they're going to be at. Most of the construction of this business is going to be in Newfoundland. We may have some upgrades to our power lines here and where the power comes ashore, and I look forward to that happening in my constituency and the constituency of the Cape Breton Lakes area, where that power is going to come ashore. And if it can create us 10, 15, 20, 100 jobs, that's great. We know that the cost of the project has already gone up. There hasn't been a shovel stuck in the ground yet. There hasn't been a piece of cable laid in the ocean, and the project's gone up. But that's not going to be reflected in our power rates. The aim of this is noble, to give the people in a position the information so they can make the proper decisions. And unlike the lepers, we're asking people to step back, hear the information, and make a proper decision. The Liberals have their plan on power, and it's debatable. Is it good or is it bad? We don't know that. We hear it's bad. We have our position on power rates. Is it good, is it bad? We don't know that either. We think it is, and that's what we're pitching to the province of Nova Scotia. But we're hearing the numbers. We're hearing the numbers of what it's going to cost and how much it's going to cost to construct and all the job numbers. But the numbers that we want to hear, how much is it going to cost us as consumers and ratepayers when that power gets to our households? We're not getting that. They can give us all the numbers and all of the numbers that we want, or they want, But the numbers the Nova Scotians want to hear is what is the final cost? What is it going to cost you, the consumer, and me, the consumer, and everybody in Nova Scotia on their power rates? And we support any project that's going to give us greener and cheaper power. Any project. We'll live within that means. But if we're not hearing that cost, and we're not hearing it, why should we support it? If it's not the best deal for Nova Scotians, then we don't want to support it. And we heard the talk today again about our dirty coal and how the price has gone up when we changed from oil to coal. And at the time, it was a cheaper alternative. And the price of coal is going down again. And we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. Well, Mr. Speaker, we have an institution, a sustainability institution, CBU. And if Muskrat Falls and the Maritime Link project are not the best for us, let's spend that money in CBU and develop a technology to burn coal cleaner. We know it can be done. It's been done at Point of Coney. The price of this project has already gone up and there hasn't been a shovel put in the ground yet. The plan, Mr. Speaker, in raising power rates, we want to freeze power rates and buy renewables at what we can afford. Can we trust the NDP to do what's best for this province? Mr. Speaker, we know that's not the case already. Their so-called commitments, or as we like to say, promises, they didn't keep them. Can we make the decisions that are good for the province of Nova Scotia? We haven't seen that yet. People want to look at the full slate of questions and make the tough decisions on whether this is a good deal or not. We know the interveners are calling for more time, but the Maritime Link Act is making it tough for the UARB to make the decision that we need to hear. It's tying their hands on what decision they have to make. And they looked at comparisons between different forms of power production in the province, but they lumped 2 or 3 sources together and he didn't study them all together. And we heard from Mr. Dalton, and we heard how reliable he is, and I don't doubt that. But when you make a phone call and ask for a price and not check into what a negotiation price would be, that's not the best thing for this province, Mr. Speaker. The government set those regulations that will not allow the UAB to extend the time frame to make the decision that may be best for the province of Nova Scotia. We know as Nova Scotians we need to know what the cost will be and what the end cost will be. And Mr. Speaker, if we don't know those costs, how can UARB make a proper decision? And Mr. Speaker, I heard earlier about Quebec Hydro, how it's so-called now the boogeyman. But I remember back last year when the shipyard contract was being talked about, and at that time the independent NDP leader stood in an ATV studio here with the Premier standing behind him, or her, and they talked about how great a deal it would be if we shared that shipyard contract around with the rest of the country. And although the Premier didn't say anything at the time, I could see him in the background with his head nodding up, yes and down, that'd be a great deal. And now they don't want to work with Quebec to give us the proper power, or we can buy power off them. We don't want to do that. We don't want to talk about where we can get the cheapest power. We just want to talk about where we can get a power supply that's green, stable. Not necessarily cheaper, stable. And we're not saying that that's probably not the case, but I'd like to see this government give the UARB the time they need to make the proper decisions. And if they think it's the right project, the UARB will come up with that decision. So if they're not scared to hear what the UARB will have to say, give them the time to allow that. So when we consider Muskrat Falls, we're talking about a 35-year project that will have total costs right now of between $4 and $4.5 billion. When considering those facts, why does the decision need to be rushed through? Mr. Speaker, we know the production of power is not going to take place for a long time yet, and I can't see the urgency of passing a bill or debating in they're allowing UAB to make a decision within 6 months. So it would be our decision to let them make the decision that's best for the province of Nova Scotia. Nobody knows if it's a good project or not. We're hearing from all kinds of interveners. And we want them to have the time, the UARB to have the time to make the decision that's proper for Nova Scotians and make sure that we do get the cheapest, the greenest, and stable energy rates. But we don't know what that is, so allow the people in power to make that decision. And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the members in the Assembly for an excellent debate today on all sides. I'd like to say that the time allotted for the emergency debate has expired. The hours have been called for tomorrow. We will now rise to sit between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m.